On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 hikers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. Just weeks later, their bodies would be found scattered in the snow, some with horrific injuries, and others with parts of their bodies missing, most chillingly, their eyes and tongues. The group's tent was slashed open from the inside, and their personal belongings were left behind. What happened to these hikers remains one of the most baffling and eerie mysteries in history. The group, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, was a mix of university students and experienced mountaineers. They were on a well-planned journey to reach the summit of Ortorten, a mountain deep in the northern Ural range. They'd been on hiking trips before and were fully prepared for what lay ahead. Their plan was to take about 10 days for the trek, and after reaching their destination, they were supposed to send a telegram back home. But that telegram never came. Days went by without a sign of the group, and that's when a search party was sent out. By February 26th, they found the group's abandoned tent. The sight was strange. The tent was cut open from the inside as though the hikers had slashed their way out in a panic. Their shoes, coats, and survival gear were left behind, and they had fled barefoot into the freezing night, even though temperatures were well below freezing, around -30 Fahrenheit, which is -34 Celsius. The fact that they left their warm clothes behind was perplexing. Why would they leave the safety of the tent in such an extreme rush? Were they fleeing from something? As the search continued, the bodies of the hikers were discovered scattered in different locations. The first 2 bodies were found relatively close to the tent, near a cedar tree. They seemed to have tried to start a fire, which suggested that they had been in the process of trying to survive out in the freezing cold. One of the hikers, Yuri Krivonishenko, even had burn marks on his hand, likely from trying to start a fire in desperation. But as they uncovered more bodies, things started to get stranger. The hikers had injuries that didn't make sense. One body showed severe internal injuries, like a fractured skull, but there were no external signs of trauma, no cuts or bruises. Another had broken ribs, but again, no visible wounds. These injuries weren't the kind you'd expect from a fall or any kind of natural event. It looked as though they had been hit with an immense force, but from where? There was no clear explanation for this kind of trauma. The most disturbing discovery came when 4 more hikers were found in a ravine, about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Some of their clothing was missing, and they had been found partially undressed, even though they were exposed to freezing temperatures. Lyudmila Dubinina, one of the women in the group, was found with her eyes and tongue missing. These injuries were not consistent with animal attacks. There were no bite marks, and animals wouldn't have been able to cause such damage without leaving some trace. What could have caused this? To make things even more puzzling, some of the hikers' clothes were found to be contaminated with radiation. Some speculated they might have stumbled into a secret military area or come into contact with radioactive materials. The presence of radiation on their clothing raised even more questions about what could have been going on. The Soviet investigation, which followed shortly after the bodies were found, concluded that an avalanche was most likely the cause of death. The theory was that the avalanche had forced the hikers to flee their tent in a panic. This theory explained their hasty departure from the tent and the fact that they left behind everything they needed to survive. But there were more major problems with this theory. For one, there was no evidence of an avalanche in the area. The terrain wasn't consistent with what you'd expect from an avalanche site, and there were no traces of snow or damage to the area that would suggest that a large avalanche had occurred. The internal injuries found on the hikers also didn't add up. Avalanches typically cause external damage, bruises, cuts, broken bones from impact with the debris. But these hikers had internal injuries with no corresponding external wounds. Some experts even suggested that these injuries may have been caused by a powerful force, possibly something like a high-pressure shockwave. But again, there was no clear explanation for that either. Were they somehow exposed to something dangerous, or was it possible that they encountered some kind of military testing? The Soviet Union was known to have secret military operations in the region at the time, and some theorized the hikers had unwillingly stumbled upon something classified. Despite all these unanswered questions, the Soviet authorities closed the case quickly and concluded the avalanche theory was the most likely explanation. The investigation wrapped up without going into detail on many of the strange findings. It was almost as if they wanted to put the case to rest as quickly as possible. This sudden closure of the case fueled further suspicion and speculation, leaving the door open for conspiracy theories and alternative explanations. In 2020, Russian authorities reopened the case and revised their conclusions, suggesting that a complicated avalanche may have been responsible. They acknowledged the inconsistencies with the previous avalanche theory, but even after re-examining the case, many of the strange elements remained unexplained. The mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident still lingers, and many believe that the truth is still out there, whether it's a hidden military cover-up, some unexplained natural phenomenon, or something else entirely. So what really happened that night? Was it just a tragic incident caused by an avalanche, or is there something more sinister at play? The truth remains as elusive as ever, and until we get more answers, the Dyatlov Pass incident will remain one of the most eerie and perplexing mysteries of the 20th century. What do you think happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're into mysteries, make sure to check out my video on the haunting secrets of the Tudor dynasty.